To the extent that we live our lives in a manner that is consistent with the truth in our heart, we thrive.
Welcome to the Meier Clinics podcast, and you just heard a quote from one of your hosts, Dr. Lisa Day. Join our licensed clinical professionals from various backgrounds as they discuss fascinating mental health topics with a wide range of guests. Meier Clinics is a Christian counseling organization with multiple clinics nationwide dedicated to treating the whole person, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. Welcome to our listening family. We thank you for joining us. Hi, everyone. Kristin Walker here. We're doing our roundtable discussion with Dr. Paul Meier. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Kristin. How are you?
I'm good. I wanted to ask you this. How long have we been doing our roundtable talks? It's been over a year, hasn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I don't know if we call it that at the beginning. I've been doing the program with you and with a couple other hosts probably for I think almost 2 years, or I know more than 18 months. But we probably started calling it Roundtable about a year ago.
Yeah, exactly. About a year ago. I had somebody question me about the use of the term roundtable, and they came up with it before me, and I went, I have a long history of that on my website. I've been doing with Dr. Meier. But anyway, in this podcast, we're going to talk about personality, and we're going to discuss the effects of the first 6 years of life on adult personality and how to heal emotional wounds from those years and to correct the lies we unfortunately came to believe in. That's a pretty weighty topic, Dr. Meier.
Yeah. In fact, we're going to do at least a dozen programs on personality. We did one already on genetic influences on personality, and today we're going to do the first 6 years, and in the next we're not sure how many it'll take, but in the next 10 or so, we're planning on covering different aspects of personality so that you really understand. Our goal is for you and our listening family to really understand the personality types of the people that are your relatives, that are your friends, that are your coworkers, that your bosses, that are politicians and other various and sundry occupations, and even maybe even mostly of yourself. What personality traits do you have that you want to keep, and what personality traits that do you want to change? Because you're not locked into it. In fact, Kristin, I just now remembered. This has happened several times, but I remember somebody coming into my office who was in the day program, where people go 7 hours a day, 5 days a week for 3 weeks. But she came in my office and she was really just bawling, and I said, "What are you crying about?" And she said, "I just can't figure out who I am." And I said, "Well, it doesn't really matter." She said, "What do you mean?" I'm really, I'm nice. I wouldn't mean to hurt somebody, but I did it just to arouse curiosity. I said, "Well, it doesn't really matter." And she said, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "Who do you want to be? You can become, whoever you want to be, with therapy and insight and making new decisions, re-decisions, we call them, and seeing, what lies you learn, like you just mentioned, Kristin, in childhood." And so today, we're going to talk about the first 6 years and how important it is, and what things can go right and what things can go wrong in those first 6 years, and what we can do about it.
Mm. So we have, I don't know, Paul, 1, 2, 3, 4. We have several on a list. Do you want to read them off, and then we'll kind of go through them?
Yeah. No, well, I think the list is just sort of for us to get a kickoff idea.
Okay. Gotcha.
According to psychiatry research, which we're guessing, it's based on a lot of studies, but it's still guessing. But we feel like about half of our adult personality, of our basic personality and way of looking at life, is formed by age 3, and about 85% by age 6, which may shock a lot of people. But we're not locked into it. That some people hear me say that and they get angry. because they think I'm saying that they're locked into it, and they're not. Like I said about that gal that was crying because she couldn't figure out who she is, because whatever things you learn in those first 6 years of life, you can relearn. And here's, I'm just going to list 15 things that we learned in our first 6 years.
Okay.
Our views of what men are like, based on mostly on your dad and other men in your life, that first 6 years, brothers, we get our views of what women are like, by moms and sisters, but also by the way women are treated by men in your home. So if your dad, for example, is really cruel to mom or hits her or things like that, then your view of women might be affected, will be affected by that. Our view of ourselves, what we think of ourselves, is in those first 6 years, whatever our parents think of us, even if it's totally wrong, we tend to believe that it's right. And if they're constantly criticizing us, we think, man, I'm really a rotten person, and the only reason my mom or dad or both can't accept me is because I'm such a horrible, horrible human being. When you're not, you're just a normal little boy or a little girl who has a real critical parent. So our view of ourselves, which is often warped, most of our basic self-talk, what we tell ourselves, and we always encourage our listeners to, in fact, if you haven't done this yet, do it. Write it down and do it as soon as you finish listening to the podcast, or pause your podcast and do it, and then come back and listen to it. But get the back page of your Bible or your journal and write today's date down, and then just a little note to yourself, dear self, dear whatever your name is. I promise from today forward to be your best friend, and I'm going to make an effort not to say anything negative to you that I wouldn't tell my best friend under the same circumstances.
Which I just did the opposite of
that.
Before
I wasn't going to say anything about it, but since you confessed.
Our listeners like it. There. So I was sitting there, listeners. I had swapped out my earbuds or my headset for my earbuds, because when I do news broadcasts where they Skype me in and I'm, the mental health person talking on a news show, you can't wear a headset. You have to wear earbuds. And so I put my headset on and I'm sitting there going, where is Paul? It's like 6 after. What's going on? And I kept
saying, where's Kristin?
Yeah.
Because I was on our call number and you were there. Maybe she forgot or something.
Yeah. And we had just emailed, this talk today. So as soon as Paul, I figured out, he has been on, and so have I, because I was logged into the same meeting. I just couldn't hear him. I just couldn't hear him because I had the wrong ear or listening device. And I was going to say the wrong ear device. That makes me sound ancient. But anyway, I said, I'm an idiot. And Paul said, I don't think you would say that to your best friend unless you.
Yeah. Would you say that to your best friend? And you didn't really mean it. You were being facetious, but it was still funny,
it's like,
and I said, I said, would you tell your best friend that he or she was an idiot for wearing the wrong headphones? No, you just tell them that they're human. But your view of marriage can be formed in the first 6 years of life. Your view of God,
yes,
a lot of that is formed in the first 6 years of life, not just by what your parents teach you, but they say, and I believe this is true. I know it is because I've had so many patients that proved it true. But when you're a little 2, 3, 4-year-old child and you're learning how to pray, and you're saying, dear Heavenly Father, or, depending on what religion you grow up in, but you're thinking, dear heavenly version of my earthly father, dear Heavenly Father, what else would you think?
Right.
And so some people grow up thinking God's not there because their dad was never there. A lot of atheists are atheists because their dad wasn't there, or because they wish he wasn't. Or if your dad or mom gave you everything you wanted, then you think God's a sugar daddy up there that, give me. Dear God, here's my list of things I want you to give me today. And depending on what your parents were like, if your parents were real harsh, you think God's up there with a whip waiting to snap you every time you goof. And I did a research study. I wasn't going to pause on these, but I changed my mind, Kristin, because I kept thinking of stuff. But I did a research study, Kristin, on I taught at Trinity Seminary in Chicago for a while, many years ago. And I did all the students had to take an extensive personality test in order to get accepted there, called the MMPI, the Minnesota Monophasic Personality Inventory. And we had to take it to get into medical school. Most medical schools and graduate schools and seminaries and, require it. And it's been given to millions and millions of people around the world. But it measures 27 aspects of your personality. So I studied. I had some students help me, and we pulled up all the MMPIs of the students without looking at their names, and looked at what church they grew up in, and saw we got an average personality type of a Lutheran, and the average of a Baptist, and the average of a Catholic, or different. And I'm not going to tell what they were either. On our podcast, but there were differences from the way they were brought up. And then another thing I did with seminary students is in Psalm 103, it lists 13 attributes of God. He's loving, he's compassionate, and all sorts of things. And I had them go down that list, and any of them that they had a lot of doubts about, how could he possibly be compassionate and let this happen and that? But they went down the list and they wrote little comments by the ones that they really had a lot of problems believing in their gut. And then I had them do the same thing for their dad and for their mom. Go down the list and see which areas your dad was really weak in. And almost 100% of the time, whatever their dad was weak in, they got upset with God for being that way. Mm-hmm. So the view of God really is strongly influenced by parents in the first 6 years of life. Sigmund Freud thought he saw that in his patients, that when he asked them what they thought of God, of course he thought that there wasn't one, and that if you believed in one, that was a rubber crutch and there's something wrong with you. But because in his patients, he saw that they almost always saw God as being just like their dad or a parent, then he thought there must not be a God. And my view is that, if you have 30 trillion, if your body is made out of 30 trillion cells with each one with 10,000 enzymes, and you take one of them out, you die, the chances of that bouncing together out of nothing are like a dictionary coming about as a result of an explosion in a printing factory. So in my view, there's got to be a God, but our view of God has worked. Okay, and then in the first 6 years of life, I think a lot of our purpose in life is formed, and it's dramatically changed. When I was growing up, I was born in 1945, so when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, when they asked 21-year-olds, what's your purpose in life? Most of them would say, to have a nice family, to contribute to society, to be a patriotic American, and they'd list stuff like that, And now the most common answers are a lot more narcissistic, like to enjoy today, and things like that. Not exclusively, but a much higher percentage. And I think a lot of that is because kids are raised different in the first 6 years now than they were back then.
Well, I just did one of those news shows today, and the topic was, why there's an article that just came out about, the use of play and how that has stopped or been, eradicated in many, many ways in school and, like that. And so that we've seen this decline, and it isn't just since the smartphone and social media. It's from before that. It's really about when television became a big part of our experience. And we were trying to figure out, myself and the woman, Amy Fuller, that hosts the show, we were trying to figure out, what's the correlation there. And we looked at, when you look at it, when you listen to a radio, when everyone used to sit around and stare at the radio, and you all were a family listening to a radio program, you weren't using, I remember those days. You weren't using visuals.
I was about 8 when we had our first TV.
Yeah. So you weren't using that visual stimuli, which is something where you are looking at something outside of yourself. Listening only and books bring you inside yourself. So that looking outward to find your value, your purpose, started with the looking at television. Because you're looking at something outside of you in order to derive what value you have and something to compare yourself to. And I thought, that is fascinating to me. That makes sense.
That is. That really does. I had never thought about that. And I know I was about 8 when we had our first television. And so in my first 6 years of life, our family, I'm the third out of 4 kids. There's 2 boys and 2 girls. And our family, almost every night, it seems like, we'd sit down and, for one thing, my dad would have 5 minutes or so of family devotions after the dinner table, and we'd always eat dinner at a table.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, people don't. They eat on the TV tray in front of their television. But we ate at a table, and my dad would have about 3 to 5 minutes of devotions, and then we'd go play for a while. But we'd always come back, and we'd be playing Monopoly and Sorry and Old Maid, or whole just Rook, and we'd play different games with each other. So we'd play games and laugh and have fellowship, and I'm still real close to my SIDS. I live just a few blocks from one of my sisters, and my other sister runs our clinics. So that's different nowadays. Now when I see young kids, like you say, they sit in front of a TV, or they're playing
their computer.
They're on their iPhone all day long.
It's just that beginning of looking outward.
I'm glad you said that.
For your value or to compare yourself to, rather than what strikes your imagination. I'm not saying film and television is bad. Oh my gosh, can it be used for good? No. Absolutely. It's just that it was the beginning of looking outward for something related to yourself, rather than what sound only and what books do, which is they force you to create a story in your mind. TV gives you the story. It just, I don't know. I thought that was interesting, but let's keep going. We have friends on there.
One more thing. I remember seeing ants, when I was about 6 or 7, crawling around on the ground outside and getting curious about them. So we had encyclopedias. We didn't have internet then. We didn't have Google,
Right.
Now you can look up anything and get the answer in
on your phone.
3 seconds.
Yeah.
But I remember pulling out the encyclopedia and reading all about ants. It probably took me an hour or more or two, but I still remember the things I read about ants way back then. Okay, then. So another thing you learn about in the first 6 years of life is what friends are and what they're like. And I know when I grew up, I had some really close friends. We got together. We rode our bikes together. We played games together. We went to school together, and we ended up, playing during recess and playing after school, and once in a while spending the night at your buddy's house or things like that. And again, nowadays, a lot of people they don't have close friends. They have Facebook friends. They have a lot of superficial friends. When I ask people that are my clients who are in their 20s, when I ask them the question, Kristin, I say, how many friends do you have that you can share anything with on a gut level, that you can admit to them, any secret that you have, and share your sadness or your joy or share your feelings with? And the most common answer I get back, almost all of them say none, but they say, some of them say, you mean there are people like that? And I say, yeah, I've always had a couple people that I could share with that I felt close to.
Right.
And then another thing, any of these things, by the way, Kristin, don't let me, if you get some more thoughts, just go ahead and, just, because I'm hard, I'm hard to climb over sometimes,
I know.
But what you shared about TV is really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to say anything about friends or anything like that.
I was just thinking, I always felt like I was really weird, and I had a weird home life. So the whole friends thing before 6, I don't know, it was very odd for me. I didn't really start having like friends until I was probably and I went to a weird school. It was very odd. But when I went to this other school when I was about 10, 11, that's when I remember, that playing with your friends and laughing hysterically. And, I remember it then. But before that, it was just weird. Like
they were superficial or what? Did you hang out with friends at all?
I did. Oh gosh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. I would say more my cousins were my friends, but I didn't see them very often. But just, I went to a private school, so I didn't really play with neighborhood friends. And it was just kind of, I was in a very hippie school, which there's nothing wrong with that. It just was a weird dynamic at the school and everything too. So yeah, it was just weird until I went to another school, and then it was like, oh, this is wonderful. So
that's cool. You know, a lot of people that have really dysfunctional parents actually do make friends in the first 6 years. A lot of them, because it's an escape from their home.
Yeah.
And so whenever I'm seeing a client for the first time, I ask them about their childhood, and I ask them, you know, when you were in the first 6 years of your life, when you were growing up, do you remember, were you just as happy as the people around you, or do you feel like, or even in elementary school, junior high, high school, were you just as happy as most of the people that around you, to the best of your guess, or do you think you were sadder than them, or what? And the common answer I get is, when I was at home around my parents, I was sad, but when I got out and hung out with my friends, I was happy. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't, you know, if somebody has a genetic depression, then they're sad all the time, no matter who they're with. So that shows that their sadness was more related to their environment than to their genetics.
Interesting.
But anyway, it affects. Oh, go ahead.
I just had a little bit of an epiphany. I'm like, what's the deal with like 9, 10? And this is taking us right into deep land. But that's about the age that my father stopped paying as much inappropriate attention to me as I got older, because he really liked children, which is awful. So I'm thinking I had more freedom to be a kid because I wasn't having to, because there was a lot of stress dealing with him, a lot of stress. So that makes sense with the timeline there.
Yeah,
like, okay, got it. So here we go, epiphany right on the show.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's good.
I'm very interested, though, in the enemies piece, because that fascinates me.
Yeah, in the first 6 years of life, you figure out who you think, anyway. I mean, doesn't mean what these things that you figure out doesn't mean you figure out the truth. You figure out your view, which is probably wrong on a lot of them. You know?
Right.
It's probably part right and part wrong on every single one of these things, like who you are, your self-talk, what marriage is, what God is like. There's 8 million people on planet Earth, and they all have a slightly different view. If you had everybody on the planet describe in detail what they thought God was like, there wouldn't be any two that totally agree.
Right.
And so that means there's only one that's right. It means nobody's totally right, actually. You know, I'm joking when I say there's only one that's right. There's really nobody that's totally right. We can be close, but we're all guessing a lot of stuff, and based on, again, parents and different factors and what we were taught. And you know, it's a shame that so many millions and millions and millions over history of people have been killed because they have a different view of religion than their mom and dad did. So, you know, their parents have killed them.
Right.
Or totally write them off and not speak to them ever again.
Right.
And if you grow up and you automatically believe everything exactly the way your parents did, then you're probably, you know, fairly stupid. Because you need to think for yourself.
Right.
It doesn't mean what they believed is wrong. I don't. Have you heard of Paul Tournier, Kristin?
Mm-mm.
He's a famous. I mean, people ought to read his books. He was a Swiss psychiatrist. He died of old age about 10 or 12 years ago, and he wrote the foreword to My Happiness is a Choice book 40 years, about 40 years ago, 41 years ago. But he was a Swiss psychiatrist that wrote a bunch of books, just filled with love. He's just a real loving guy. And he said, when you get to be an adult, a young adult, you know, college age or sooner, high school, or, you know, when you get to be an adult, it's healthy to take off the religious overcoat of your parents and take a good look at it. And then you can put it back on, but now you modify it to fit what you believe to be the truth. Doesn't mean when you put it back on, it's going to be better than your parents or worse than your parents. Hopefully it's better. I mean, being a Christian, I try to base mine on the Bible, but there's a lot of ways to interpret different verses in the Bible too.
Hi, this is Dr. Paul Meier of the Meier Clinics. Our Christian counselors across the country have a goal of helping all those who come to us to become what God has called them to be. If you're in a situation where you're not at peace within yourself, or you just feel like there's joy that's missing in your life, we can come alongside to help you obtain peace and joy.
This message is sponsored by the Meier Clinic Foundation, a nonprofit Christian counseling ministry. The number is 1-888-7-CLINIC, 1-888-7-CLINIC.
So anyway, you review God, your purpose in life, friends, enemies. You figure out who your enemies are. And so your enemy might be anybody that's of the opposite political party, for example.
But in your first 6 years?
Yeah, even in the first 6 years. I just remembered something else that was really funny. Back, Dwight Eisenhower was one of the leading generals that saved the world from Hitler, and in World War I, and he became president. And I remember, I'm a nice guy, as you know. I've only been in, I think, 2 fights in my whole life, but one of them was when I was about 10 or so, and a kid from elementary school told me that his parents weren't going to vote for Eisenhower, that he didn't like Eisenhower either, and I beat him up. How could anybody be so unpatriotic that they wouldn't like the guy that saved us from Hitler? You know what I mean? So even as a child, I had my views, of who the enemies are, and a lot of them were wrong. But you learn and you learn, there's kids that you think are nice, and then they end up being bad. There was a kid next door that when I first moved there, I was friends with for a little while, but then he ended up breaking into our home when nobody was there and stealing a bunch of stuff and trying to put a nail in another kid's head. And, he ended up going to reform school and everything else, later on when he got older, and became a member of a gang, and so people that you think are nice, you find out some of them aren't. And so anyway, you learn about what enemies are like. And then there's electronic babysitters nowadays.
In my day, it was the TV. That was your electronic babysitter, was the television.
What was it? Oh, TV, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And in my day, they didn't have TV yet. Back when I was in the first 3 years of life, we didn't even have running water in our house that you could drink. I would go with my mom down about a block away with a pail and get water out of a well that we could drink. So I'm really old, but if we needed a babysitter, we my parents would hire somebody to babysit us. But and they still do hire babysitters. But nowadays, a lot of parents, it's a relief to have your kid just play with his iPhone or iPad all the time, because it keeps them off your back. And I'm not saying it's all bad or anything. It's just and I haven't done a big bunch of research on the benefits of having that and the detriments of it. I don't know if you've read much about it.
Oh yeah, we're starting a whole initiative about all this.
And all that.
Yep. Those cell phones, iPads, video games, your computer, all of those things. Yeah. I mean,
how do you think they influence us?
Oh my gosh, that's a whole other show.
Influence kids that are 6 now, because that's all they've known.
Because I think that you're able to, you're able to control the narrative more. Kids in that early developmental stage, there's a reason why throughout all mammals, they're with their parents for that, whatever amount of time it is for that mammal, where you're in a cocoon and you're supposed to be being protected by your parents. Well, our kids, you don't see bears and whales and whatever having the influence of the world, TV, social media, the internet, coming in and having this influence on them during that those early developmental stages where you're really just supposed to know about and feel safe around and think that the world revolves around your family, whoever that may be, whether it's a foster family or I think it has, obviously it has a huge impact on our kids.
I have seen some studies, Kristin, on if you get little kids in the first 6 years of life and you can and how they react. They can watch a cartoon that's real friendly and things like that. And then you switch them for about 10 or 15 minutes to a cartoon where people are hitting each other and beating each other up and stuff, which, I mean, they do that even in, Disney cartoons.
Warner Brothers.
They
did it in Warner Brothers.
Yeah,
I watched Bugs Bunny and all that stuff, and it was all.
And when they do that, the kids start hitting each other. They start copying it. Yeah. And then they get a little older and play these video games.
And you're killing, raping, pillaging.
You're killing people. Yeah, and young kids are doing that. 5, 6-year-olds are playing video games where they're going around, seeing how many people they can kill. They can get more power and kill more people. And I mean, it's definitely got a negative influence on kids. Your view of animals, the first 6 years of life, based on, if you had a pet or not, it would help. But if you see your parents respecting animals and treating them nice, or disrespecting animals and things,
right?
Your education, your view of education in the first 6 years. If you go to, there's different ways to get educated, different ways to learn, and your parents teach you. And we'd go to Sunday school every Sunday and learn stuff, and have different things where we'd learn different activities, and there's scouts and all sorts of things. But and then you go to school, if you go to preschool and then kindergarten, and your view, who you have for your kindergarten teacher and things like that can influence your view of education. If you're a little bit behind in reading or things like that, then you might feel stupid. And they thought Einstein was retarded when he was young, but he was probably busy thinking about physics and didn't answer their questions. He went to elementary school in his pajamas one time when his parents didn't see him doing it. And he was pretty old before he started even talking. So, your view of education can be affected by the first 6 years. Time management, how you manage your time. Your parents may have excessive expectations or no expectations. And we've already religious views can be influenced. I think they're influenced more by how your parents are than what they teach you.
Right.
But it's also influenced by what they teach you and what if you do go to church, what it teaches you, whether they teach you that they're the only ones that are right and everybody else is wrong, and stuff like that. So those are the things. That's just a list of things that are influenced for 6 years. But,
and you had something else that I love as a tail end around this. How, and this, I don't know, this seems so vast to me. I'm interested to see how you're going to wrap this up in 10 minutes. How to produce.
And we may not, we may, do more on that, but go ahead. What's your question?
How to produce various personality types on purpose in your brand new babies.
Yeah. And this is, listen, folks, listen, our loving listening family. This is really pretty interesting. I wrote a book 40 years ago. I went to Duke for my psychiatry training. It was a great psychiatry residency. We had our student teacher ratio was 2 profs per student, which is just amazing. I mean, I'd do counseling on a client. There'd be a 2-way mirror on the wall, and 2 different profs would be there, and then they would educate me on what I did right or wrong. And of course, they were always from different philosophies, which is good. So they would disagree with each other on what I did right or wrong too, which was good for me to hear. But anyway, I did a lot of research on personality types when I was in residency. And then the first book I wrote was actually a book on personality development, where I had several chapters in there on if you had a bunch of kids, if you had like 6 kids and you wanted one of them to become obsessive compulsive, and you wanted another one to be real histrionic, real emotional, and you wanted another one to be real paranoid, and you wanted another one to be real passive aggressive, and and learn ways to fail.
Like
Nobody really, nobody with any brain. But if you wanted that, I'm just saying, if you wanted that, and if you wanted another child to be extremely socially introverted, and you wanted another one to have extremely low self-esteem, and you wanted another one to commit suicide by giving them don't exist messages, like for example, if a child in the first 6 years, they keep going up to mom or going up to dad, and they ask questions, or they want to get some attention, and they don't get any. They're always pushed away. The dad's buried in his back, when I was young, they were buried in their newspaper. Now they don't have a newspaper, but dad's buried in something, his computer or something, and he says, don't bother me now, don't bother me now. Every time you're doing that, you're giving your child don't exist messages. Don't exist because you're interfering with my life. And I've got clients whose parents have told them, the worst day of my life was when you were born, that you ruined my life, and stuff like that. And you wanted another child to be a total narcissist, and you wanted another child to be a sociopath, and you wanted one of them to be a sociopath that ends up in prison, and another one to be a sociopath that ends up becoming a politician. You'd raise them a little bit different. Or you wanted another child to be a borderline personality disorder.
Lots of trauma.
Then there's research to show how you can do that. I mean, not that you want to, but how those different personality types are formed, and knowing, understanding those things is real helpful. So you will do a better job of raising your children so that they're healthy and loving and not any one personality disorder. Little babies need a lot of touch, for example, and if babies don't get touched and held, they develop what's called marasmus, 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 and they can wither away and die. They won't eat. They'll just get real skinny and die from lack of touch, and they need a lot of touch. And if little babies, when they're wet, they need to be changed. When they're cold, they need to be comforted. Put a blanket on. If they're too hot, they need to have it taken off. If they're, they have needs, basic needs, and they're totally dependent on the mom primarily. And if the mom doesn't meet those needs, or a good babysitter when mom is working, then the child is more likely to develop borderline traits later on. And I'm not exactly sure why, but I just know it's true. So there's different things. Like 15 of the first 16 astronauts were firstborn sons. Now, how could that possibly be a coincidence? See, it's not. They had to be. They're good, nice people. I mean, I was the team physician that went with Jim Irwin. He went to the moon back, but I went with Jim Irwin on a mountain climbing expedition way back when I was young and healthier and slimmer. And I've known 2 male and 1 female astronauts that are really nice people. But to be an astronaut, you have to be a perfectionist because your life depends on it. You have to make, if you're going to go to the moon and back, you've got to be a perfectionist. So they pick people who are extreme perfectionists to be astronauts. And birth order affects a lot of things. And so when you don't have any kids, you don't know what to expect. So when the first one comes along, most parents are going to expect too much. And so they're critical of the child. They expect the child to have manners and not to spill their milk, and things that kids all normally do are a surprise to parents that haven't had a child yet. And so the first child ends up becoming more perfectionistic and self-critical because parents are critical, and so they achieve a lot more in life. They get better grades, they earn more money, but they're less happy. So unless they get therapy or get some help or listen to our podcast, of course, and so they become more obsessive compulsive. Firstborn often do, and something like 75% of medical students are the oldest child of their sex, and 75 or 80% of PhDs are. A lot of pastors are. I was invited to do a talk at a large seminary with 1,500 students, and so I was talking about this in my chapel talk, and I got the seminary so mad that they didn't ever ask me to speak again, after that, and I used to once in a while. But I talked about perfectionism and I said I would guess that people who become pastors, they're good people. I mean, most of them are really good people, but they want to be the one that's rescuing and helping, just like, people that go into psychiatry too are like that. And I said, so I would really guess that a high percentage of you are the oldest child of your sex in your family. And so I said, so I want all of you to stand up if you're the oldest child of your sex in your family. And about 80% stood up, and they were amazed. And I said, you need to be sure, if you think it was God that called you, you need to be sure it's God, not your mother or father or somebody else. And then I said, now those of you who get straight A's become professors. And so that really ticked off some, because behind me were sitting about 30 professors in a row. They sat behind the speaker. And I said, how many of you were the oldest of your sex in your family? And all but one stood up. And I said, well, isn't that interesting? And so, that really shook up some people. And so they didn't ask me to come back. But so that you can produce an obsessive compulsive by expecting too much. And no matter what they do, it's not quite good enough. And if they get all A's and a B, you ask them, why did you get that B? When they're playing soccer on a soccer team or baseball or whatever sports they are, there's the parent, there's inevitably one parent there or two that every time they make a slight little mistake, they're yelling at their kids right in front of the other kids. And so their kids might grow up to be a professional athlete, but they won't enjoy life much unless they get over that tough critical stuff. We're probably going to have to do a whole program on these, but that's just one personality type.
I find it fascinating that, obviously there were studies done about this, how to create this in children, because that's how you learn how it is created. But oh my gosh, I can't even fathom, some sick one of those disorders parent, not obviously the more very severe ones that would actually try to do this with their children.
No. And the reason this is important for us to, we need to go into this in more detail, because the reason this is really important is because people who are, those of you who are in our listening family right now, when you hear about it, you'll think, oh, so that's why I'm that way. Oh, that's why I do this. And that's not bad. That's good if you figure that out, because then you can say, I don't have to keep doing that. If my parents said, why'd you get that B when I got all A's and a B? They were wrong. And now I'm, as an adult, most people keep on thinking whatever they were taught in the first 6 years. So you keep thinking if you get all A's and one B, you're a failure. And you're not. You're, exceptionally not a failure. You're the opposite. A success, a real success. And so learning the truth. I mean, life is tough enough, Kristin, just dealing with the truth. And why make it twice as hard by beating yourself over the head with a bunch of untruth?
I know.
Why go through life believing a lot of things about yourself that aren't true?
Yeah.
And because that's just really frustrating. That's depressing.
I had somebody say to me today, it's a wonderful, wonderful person. He does a podcast on the network. His name's Johnny Crowder. And we were talking, every few months we get some time between what we both do to have, a really deep, wonderful conversation. And we were talking about early childhood and things that we learned. And he said, it isn't that you or I, meaning he and I, aren't fearful people or free from fear. We do live in a greater degree of faith, which a lot of people don't understand. And we also absolutely just have made friends with fear, because I will have people say, my God, all the stuff you do, you're just fearless. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I totally have fear. I just do stuff. I just do what I'm afraid of anyway.
Yeah, me too. I have a fear of failure.
I don't. I think failure is I think it's imperative. And I really take issue with the word failure. I think a lot of times it's not a failure. It's a misstep. It's not a mistake, because it gets
you're right.
to where
you learn more from failing than you do from succeeding.
And you know who helped me with that, Paul?
If you have a failure, you should thank God for it, because, oh man, look at all the good stuff I learned from that. Who'd you learn
guess
that from?
Who has drilled into my ear for the last 2 years about that word, Paul? You. I have learned from you about, everything that you've learned and that's gone on up until this point is exactly how it should have gone. Those were things that you needed to learn. It's helped me release a lot of negative self-talk, a lot of things that I learned, in that early childhood to just, be so perfectionistic and so on, to go, no, that was all part of what I was supposed to learn. And that's not a failure. That's a misstep. And I'm going to learn more from that than I would have if something was just handed to me. Those are things that you've talked about on this very show.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I want to remind our listeners, before we quit, I want to remind you to be sure you do that today. You write the date down on a journal or somewhere, your Bible or your journal, and note to yourself, dear, and then put your name down. I promise from today on to be your best friend. And I'm going to make an effort. It won't be perfect at that either, but I'm going to make an effort not to say anything negative to you that I wouldn't say to my best friend under the same circumstances. And the reason that you do that, and when you do that and practice it, you'll be amazed at how many of the lies you start seeing that are in your head. Because you would tell your best friend the truth. If your best friend left the lights on and in the car and the battery was dead, you wouldn't say, "You stupid idiot." You'd say, "Well, hey, we'll take care of it. We'll get it jumped or something. And, welcome to the race. We all make mistakes." So you would tell your friend the truth, but you'd tell yourself, "What a stupid idiot. How could you possibly do that?" Blah, 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 blah.
I just wrote down what you said. Say it one more time, just so everybody can hear it. I promise from this forward to be.
I promise from today forward to be my own best friend, to be your best friend, and I'm going to make an effort not to say anything negative to you, which is to yourself, that I wouldn't tell my best friend under the same circumstances. So if your best friend did something really stupid, then it's okay to say that was a stupid thing to do. Then you can say that to yourself if you'd tell your best friend that. But you would always tell your best friend the truth. And so why not tell yourself the truth? If you're telling yourself something different than you would tell your best friend, that means you're lying to yourself. Why go through life lying to yourself when life is tough enough as it is? If you want to call yourself stupid, that's a stupid thing to do. Right. But we all do it to some extent. So I'm not making fun of you. I'm saying we all do it to some extent.
Well, I wrote it down, listeners. I wrote it down. If you heard scribbling on my table right next to my mic, that was me writing it down on a Post-it note, and I am sticking it right there underneath my monitor so that I can remember to read that every day. Because, it's all well and good to type stuff. We're constantly typing things. But I'm telling you right now, there is something about, even if you can't read your own writing anymore, because all you do is type, which would be me, write it down anyway. Because there's the act of writing out with your hand and a pen is, I don't know, there's something spiritual about that.
Well, and there's research on that you remember it better too.
Yes,
there's research on that.
Exactly. So there you go. I think we're good for tonight, Paul.
I do too.
Listening.
So when we come back, we'll talk about how to have 12 kids and make each one turn out exactly what personality type you want them to turn out.
Yeah. Okay. There you go. The good ones. I thought you were going to say how to turn each one into a horrible personality disorder. No, we'll do the good ones.
I do mean the personality disorders. But, the reason to learn that is so you won't do that.
Right.
So you won't make your child a paranoid adult or a passive-aggressive adult. Or,
right. Exactly.
Narcissistic adult.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you, Paul, so much.
Okay.
And thank you, listeners, for another episode of Roundtable with Dr. Paul Meier on Mental Health News Radio. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. Tune in next time for another engaging discussion on relevant mental health topics. If you have any questions about Meier Clinics, please visit our website at meierclinics.com. That's MEIER clinics.com, or call us at 888-7-CLINIC. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or any of your favorite podcast apps. And please note that we are a member of and produced by Mental Health News Radio Network, MHNRnetwork.com.